In the 1820s, inside a workshop in the Netherlands, a machine began squeezing the fat out of chocolate. That may not sound like a turning point in human history, but before this machine, chocolate was stubborn, oily, expensive, and usually served as a drink. It did not snap into neat squares. It did not melt smoothly on the tongue. It could not be wrapped, stacked, shipped, and sold by the millions in the form we now recognize. The press divided cacao into two useful materials, a dry cake that could be ground into cocoa powder and a pale, fragrant fat called cocoa butter. Once manufacturers learned to separate them, they could also recombine them in controlled proportions. That simple reversal helped create the modern chocolate bar. Yet the machine did something else. By making chocolate easier to manufacture and cheaper to sell, it accelerated demand for a crop that could grow only in a narrow belt of humid land around the equator. Consumers saw polished wrappers and smooth brown squares. The farms, forests, diseases, and labor behind them moved farther out of sight. Chocolate was becoming ordinary. Its story was becoming anything but. To understand why people once used cacao as money, why European religious authorities argued over drinking it, why engineers spent decades trying to improve its texture, and why the future of a candy aisle now depends on decisions made by small farmers thousands of miles away, we have to begin before chocolate was sweet. We have to begin with a tree that seems poorly designed for global conquest. The cacao tree grows in warm, humid regions where temperatures remain relatively stable. It dislikes drought, harsh wind, and extreme heat. Young trees often benefit from shade. Its flowers emerge directly from the trunk and older branches, an unusual growth pattern known as cauliflory. Most of those tiny flowers never become fruit. Those that do produce thick pods that can be yellow, orange, red, purple, or green, depending on the variety and stage of ripeness. Inside each pod, several dozen seeds sit in sweet, slippery pulp. Fresh cacao seeds do not taste like a chocolate bar. They are bitter and astringent. The familiar flavor must be constructed through a chain of transformations. The pods are opened. The seeds and pulp are removed and gathered into piles, boxes, baskets, or trays. Microorganisms feed on sugars in the pulp, producing heat, acids, and alcohols. The seeds die. Their internal chemistry changes, and the foundations of chocolate flavor begin to form. After fermentation, the beans are dried. Later, they are roasted, cracked, separated from their shells, and ground. Miss one of these stages, and the result can be flat, sour, smoky, moldy, or simply unpleasant. Chocolate, in other words, was never discovered ready-made. People invented it. Long before European ships reached the Americas, indigenous communities had learned how to manage cacao's difficult biology and transform its seeds. Archaeological evidence has continued to push cacao's known history deeper into the past, including evidence of very early use in the upper Amazon region. The exact path from South America into Central America and Mexico remains an active field of research. What is clear is that cacao became deeply embedded in the cultures of Mesoamerica. Among Maya communities, cacao appeared in art, writing, vessels, feasts, offerings, marriage customs, and elite political life. Painted ceramics sometimes show people pouring chocolate from one container into another, creating a layer of foam. The foam mattered. Without modern emulsifiers or mechanical mixers, chocolate beverages could separate. Skilled preparation turned drinking chocolate into a performance. Cacao could be ground and combined with water, maize, chili, flowers, seeds, honey, vanilla, or other local ingredients. Recipes varied by place, period, and purpose. This was not simply a primitive version of hot cocoa. It belonged to a different culinary world. The drink might be bitter, spicy, aromatic, thick, or cool. It could appear at ceremonies, diplomatic gatherings, religious events, and elite meals. Cacao also carried associations with fertility, sacrifice, wealth, and authority. Its value came partly from scarcity. Cacao did not grow equally well across the powerful societies that desired it. Political centers in the Mexican highlands often depended on warmer regions for supplies. Beans moved through trade and tribute networks, linking tropical farms to rulers and urban markets. That made cacao more than food. It became portable value. In parts of Mesoamerica, cacao beans served as a medium of exchange. Market prices could be expressed in beans. Tribute records documented sacks or loads of cacao arriving from subject regions. A seed that could be stored, counted, transported, and consumed had several advantages as money. It also had disadvantages. Cacao could rot. Beans varied in quality and size. And like almost every successful currency, they attracted counterfeiters. Historical accounts describe empty shells being filled with earth or other material to imitate valuable beans. The scam is strangely familiar. The object was different, but the principle was the same. People trusted the appearance of value, so someone learned to manufacture the appearance. By the early 16th century, the Mexican Empire demanded cacao from regions under its control. At court, chocolate was associated with privilege, warriors, rulers, and ceremonial hospitality. Popular retellings often describe the Emperor Moctezuma drinking enormous quantities every day. Colonial accounts do emphasize the scale and prestige of cacao at his court. Although the most dramatic numbers should be treated cautiously, what matters is not whether one ruler consumed a precise number of vessels. What matters is that the Spanish entered a society where cacao already connected agriculture, taxation, status, religion, and political control. At first, some Europeans failed to recognize what they were seeing. During Christopher Columbus's fourth voyage in 1502, his expedition encountered a trading canoe carrying unfamiliar goods, including cacao. A later account suggests that when some beans spilled, local traders hurried to recover them, as though something precious had fallen. The Europeans saw seeds, the traders saw wealth. Cacao did not immediately conquer Europe. Unsweetened Mesoamerican chocolate could seem bitter, fatty, and heavily seasoned to newcomers. Spanish description sometimes treated it with curiosity or suspicion, but conquerors rarely leave valuable systems untouched. After the fall of the Mexican capital, Spanish settlers, officials, merchants, and religious communities gradually adopted chocolate. Indigenous knowledge remained essential. Local farmers still grew cacao. Local workers fermented, dried, roasted, ground, mixed, and served it. Indigenous women and household labor were especially important in preserving and adapting preparation techniques. Europeans changed the recipes. Sugar became increasingly important. Cinnamon and other imported spices entered the cup. The drink could be served hot. Milk was sometimes added. European tastes did not erase Mesoamerican chocolate all at once, but they created a new version designed for colonial and European consumers. The combination of cacao and sugar joined two histories that had previously been separate. Both crops required particular climates. Both could command high prices. And both became entangled with expanding empires and coercive labor systems. Chocolate reached Spain as a rare colonial luxury. Its arrival is often described through tidy stories involving a single explorer, a royal presentation, or a specific shipment. The actual spread was probably less theatrical. Travelers, merchants, missionaries, administrators, and colonial families all helped carry knowledge and ingredients across the Atlantic. At first, access remained limited. Cacao had to be cultivated in tropical America, transported to a port, shipped across an ocean, processed, and mixed with expensive sugar and spices. Every stage added cost. That cost became part of chocolate's appeal. In European courts and wealthy households, specialized equipment appeared. Decorated cups, pots with hinged lids, stirring tools, serving trays, and porcelain sets. Preparing chocolate required labor and ceremony. Serving it demonstrated that a household could afford imported ingredients, skilled servants, and fashionable objects. Chocolate became a performance of class. It was also marketed as medicine. European physicians and writers tried to fit cacao into existing theories of the body. Depending on the author and preparation, chocolate might be described as nourishing, restorative, stimulating, warming, cooling, helpful, or harmful. The contradictions were not necessarily seen as contradictions. A preparation containing cacao, sugar, cinnamon, vanilla, chili, milk, or water could differ substantially from another preparation also called chocolate. Religious authorities faced a different question. Did drinking chocolate break a religious fast? The debate lasted because chocolate occupied an awkward space between food and drink. A thin beverage might seem permissible. A rich, nourishing mixture could function like a meal. Local customs, personal interests, theological interpretation, and institutional politics all influenced the answer. There was no single dramatic moment when one official tasted chocolate and settled the matter forever. The popular stories are cleaner than the historical record. The debate itself, however, reveals chocolate's importance. People do not spend generations arguing over a product no one consumes. By the 17th century, chocolate had spread through elite circles in Italy, France, England, and elsewhere in Europe. It joined coffee and tea as one of several fashionable caffeinated drinks arriving through global trade. Each beverage created its own social spaces. In London, chocolate houses attracted wealthy patrons, political discussion, gambling, business, and gossip. Some developed reputations as gathering places for particular factions or social groups. Chocolate was no longer only a foreign curiosity, it was becoming part of European public life. But it remained expensive and its texture remained difficult. Cacao contains a large proportion of fat. Ground cacao produced a dense paste. Makers formed it into blocks or cakes, but these were generally intended to be dissolved into drinks. Processing was laborious, and products could be gritty or inconsistent. Manufacturers also faced a temptation familiar to every industry selling an expensive ingredient: adulteration. Some producers stretched cocoa with starches or cheaper materials. Poor quality fats could be added. In badly regulated markets, accusations became more extreme, including claims involving colored powders or mineral substances. Industrial reformers would later use purity as a powerful marketing tool. But the larger problem could not be solved by advertising alone. Chocolate needed new machinery. Before that machinery arrived, European demand had already transformed cacao-growing regions. Colonial powers tried to expand production wherever the climate permitted. Cacao plantations developed in parts of Venezuela, Ecuador, Central America, the Caribbean, and Brazil. Disease, war, changing trade routes, and labor shortages repeatedly shifted the geography of supply. The labor could be indigenous, enslaved, coerced, indebted, or poorly paid, depending on time and place. There was no single plantation system covering every region. But a recurring pattern emerged. The people who consumed chocolate were increasingly separated from those who produced its ingredients. Sugar sharpened that division. European chocolate became sweeter just as Atlantic sugar economies expanded through enslaved labor. The smooth cup served in a decorated salon carried the products of tropical land and exhausting work, though the elegance of the ritual concealed both. This distance became one of chocolate's defining features. The consumer experienced pleasure. The system distributed the cost elsewhere. In 1828, the Dutch manufacturer Casparus van Houten received a patent connected to a hydraulic cocoa press. The machine squeezed much of the cocoa butter from roasted cacao paste, leaving a hard cake that could be pulverized. The new cocoa powder mixed more easily with water. It was less oily and could be standardized more effectively. Treatments using alkaline salts also reduced acidity, darkened the color, and changed how cocoa dispersed in liquid. The process became known as Dutching. The invention produced a valuable byproduct: cocoa butter. At first, removing fat made better drinking cocoa, but manufacturers soon realized they could add cocoa butter back into a different mixture. By controlling the proportions of cocoa solids, fat, and sugar, they could produce a smoother paste capable of being molded. In Britain, J.S. Fry & Sons is generally credited with launching one of the first modern molded eating chocolate products in 1847. It was a crucial step, though the result would probably seem heavy and somewhat coarse compared with a modern bar. Chocolate still needed refinement. Milk presented another challenge. Adding liquid milk introduced water, which behaves badly in a fat-rich chocolate mixture and reduces shelf life. In the 19th century, developments in condensed and powdered milk helped manufacturers experiment with a stable milk chocolate. Swiss producer Daniel Peter is usually credited with developing a commercially successful milk chocolate in the 1870s, working in an environment shaped by advances in preserved milk. Milk did more than soften the flavor. It reduced bitterness, changed the texture, and made chocolate seem gentler and more suitable for children and families. It helped move chocolate away from its older reputation as an intense adult beverage associated with aristocrats, medicine, and stimulation. Then came the conche. In 1879, Swiss manufacturer Rodolphe Lindt developed machinery associated with prolonged mixing and refining. The exact details of the invention story have sometimes been romanticized, but its effect was real. Extended mechanical working reduced roughness, distributed cocoa butter more evenly, released unwanted volatile compounds, and encouraged the smooth texture consumers now expect. Chocolate no longer had to feel sandy, it could melt. That sensory change transformed the business. Smoothness became a sign of quality. Manufacturers could create products that were sweeter, milder, more stable, and easier to eat. The familiar chocolate bar was not one invention, it was a stack of inventions. Fermentation created flavor precursors. Roasting developed aroma. Grinding released fat. The press separated cocoa butter. Powder processing improved drinks. Recombination made molding possible. Preserved milk softened bitterness. Conching refined texture. Controlled cooling produced shine and snap. Each breakthrough solved one problem and revealed another. Manufacturers now had a product suited to mass production, but they needed mass demand. Factories did not merely supply an existing appetite, they taught people how, when, and why to eat chocolate. During the 19th and early 20th centuries, companies created recognizable packages, decorated tins, boxed assortments, illustrated advertisements, collectible cards, molded shapes, and individually wrapped portions. Chocolate could be presented as nourishment, elegance, romance, reward, or innocent pleasure. A box of chocolates turned an agricultural commodity into a social message. Giving chocolate could express affection without requiring the giver to invent new words. Manufacturers linked products to holidays, courtship, family life, and childhood. The emotional meanings were not entirely artificial. Sweetness and fat are pleasurable. Cacao contains caffeine and theobromine, mild stimulants that can affect alertness. Chocolate also carries aroma compounds and a melting texture that make it unusually satisfying, but culture decides when that pleasure is appropriate. Advertising supplied the occasions. Chocolate for a birthday. Chocolate after a difficult day. Chocolate at Christmas. Chocolate for someone you love. Chocolate because you feel guilty. Chocolate because you would like to stop feeling guilty. Industrialists also experimented with a moral image. Several important British chocolate manufacturers came from Quaker families. Their religious traditions discouraged involvement in some other profitable trades and emphasized sobriety, reform, and social responsibility. Companies built planned communities near factories, including Bournville outside Birmingham. These developments offered housing, green space, and social facilities that contrasted with many crowded industrial districts. They also helped create loyal, disciplined workforces and strengthened corporate reputations. The story was neither simple exploitation nor pure philanthropy. Industrial welfare could improve lives while reinforcing the power of the employer. Chocolate had become modern enough to contain both reform and marketing in the same wrapper. Its portability soon made it useful far beyond the candy shop. Military organizations valued chocolate because it was compact, energy-dense, familiar, and relatively easy to distribute. Soldiers carried chocolate in different forms during conflicts of the 19th and 20th centuries. During the World Wars, chocolate appeared in military rations. Manufacturers developed bars intended to withstand transport and provide calories under difficult conditions. Some military chocolate was deliberately made less tempting so soldiers would save it for emergencies. That is an unusual achievement. Designing chocolate people would not immediately want to eat. Millions of service members encountered chocolate as part of military life. Soldiers also distributed it to civilians and children. Wartime shortages made it more desirable, while post-war abundance strengthened its association with comfort, normality, and peace. Chocolate had traveled from ritual vessel to royal cup, from pharmacy to factory, and from gift box to field ration. By the mid-20th century, it seemed fully domesticated, yet the cacao tree had not changed its basic requirements. Factories could operate in Europe or North America. Cacao could not. The center of global production increasingly moved to West Africa. European colonial powers had introduced cacao to African territories during the 19th century. Farmers in places including the Gold Coast, now Ghana, recognized its commercial potential. Production expanded through a mixture of local initiative, colonial infrastructure, land access, family labor, migration, trade networks, and government policy. This was not simply a story of Europeans creating plantations and Africans supplying labor. In Ghana, many African farmers established and managed cacao farms themselves, sometimes moving into new regions to acquire suitable land. The crop offered a path to cash income, investment, education, and social mobility. It also created dependency. A farmer might wait several years for new trees to produce significant harvests. Once planted, cacao tied household decisions to weather, disease, transport, government pricing, international markets, and the behavior of buyers farther down the chain. In Côte d'Ivoire, cacao production expanded enormously during the 20th century, supported by migration, forest clearing, government policy, and international demand. Ghana and Côte d'Ivoire eventually became the two dominant producers, together supplying a very large share of the world's cacao. But producing cacao and producing chocolate are not the same business. Farmers sell fermented and dried beans. Farther along the chain, companies grind, press, formulate, manufacture, brand, distribute, and retail finished products. Much of the final price of a chocolate product reflects stages beyond the farm: processing, packaging, advertising, transport, retail margins, and brand value. The people performing the most climate-sensitive part of the work often receive only a small share of the value created by the final product. That imbalance helps explain why serious labor problems persist. Cacao farming requires repeated manual work. Pods must be inspected and harvested carefully because they ripen at different times. Farmers cut them from trunks and branches, open them, remove the wet beans, manage fermentation, dry the crop, and transport heavy sacks. In households with little money and limited access to hired labor, children may help on family farms. Not every task performed by a child is classified as child labor. The concern is work that is hazardous, excessive, interferes with education, or is performed by children who are too young. Investigations in West African cacao regions have documented large numbers of children involved in hazardous agricultural tasks. The causes are systemic. Household poverty is central. So are limited schools, weak infrastructure, labor shortages, migration, farm size, low productivity, and unstable income. A certification label or corporate promise cannot by itself repair every one of these conditions. In 2001, governments, industry representatives, and others established what became known as the Harkin-Engel Protocol, aimed at combating the worst forms of child labor in cacao production. Programs, monitoring systems, community initiatives, and corporate sustainability projects followed. Progress has occurred in some places. The problem has not disappeared. The persistence of child labor exposes the central contradiction of inexpensive chocolate. Consumers expect a standardized product at an accessible price. Farmers face costs and risks that are anything but standardized. When the farm price is too low, the pressure does not vanish. It moves into household decisions. The environmental pressure follows a similar pattern. Cacao can grow within diverse agroforestry systems under shade trees. Well-managed shaded farms may support more wildlife and store more carbon than exposed monocultures. But when farmers need to expand production quickly, forest land can appear attractive. Clearing creates space and may temporarily provide fertile soil. Over time, expansion has contributed to deforestation and forest degradation in important producing regions. Again, the consumer sees the bar. The landscape change occurs somewhere else. Cacao is also vulnerable to disease. Fungal and viral threats can damage pods, weaken trees, and destroy harvests. Aging cacao trees may produce less. Replacing them is expensive because farmers lose income while young trees mature. Climate variability intensifies these problems. Excessive rain can favor some diseases and disrupt drying. Drought and heat can stress trees. Shifts in seasonal patterns make farm decisions less predictable. A crop that already grows within a limited climatic range is being asked to supply a global industry that values consistency above almost everything else. For decades, industrial chocolate taught consumers that the same bar should taste identical in every city and every season. Agriculture does not naturally behave that way. Manufacturers achieve consistency by blending beans from many farms and origins, controlling roasting, adding sugar and milk ingredients, and carefully managing production. The factory smooths out variation. The risks remain at the beginning of the chain. Recent market disruptions have made those risks more visible. Poor harvests, disease pressure, unfavorable weather, aging farms, supply deficits, and low global stocks have contributed to sharp changes in cacao prices. Higher commodity prices do not automatically solve farmer poverty. Timing matters. Government pricing systems, contracts, debts, yields, local inflation, input costs, and the share reaching individual producers all affect the result. A farmer can live inside a period of record prices and still struggle. Meanwhile, manufacturers may shrink packages, adjust recipes, promote smaller portions, raise prices, or place greater emphasis on premium products. Chocolate begins changing social status again. The product that moved from royal luxury to affordable treat may become less casually affordable in some markets. At the same time, specialty makers promote single-origin bars, named farms, unusual cacao varieties, careful fermentation, and distinctive flavor notes. This movement restores some of the variation that industrial chocolate spent a century removing. Chocolate can taste fruity, floral, nutty, earthy, spicy, acidic, or fermented. Those flavors come from genetics, soil, climate, fermentation, drying, roasting, formulation, and storage. There is no single natural chocolate flavor. There are many possible flavors that industry learned to compress into a familiar expectation. Modern chocolate also exists beyond the bar. Cocoa powder appears in drinks, baked goods, breakfast products, desserts, and savory recipes. Cocoa butter is valued because it remains firm at ordinary room temperature but melts close to body temperature. That property contributes to chocolate's distinctive mouthfeel. It also makes cocoa butter useful in cosmetics, creams, soaps, and some pharmaceutical preparations. Chocolate manufacturing depends on tempering, a carefully controlled process of heating and cooling that encourages cocoa butter to form a desirable crystal structure. Properly tempered chocolate is glossy, contracts cleanly from a mold, snaps when broken, and melts pleasantly. Poorly stored chocolate may develop a pale coating called bloom. Fat bloom occurs when cocoa butter migrates and recrystallizes. Sugar bloom can appear when moisture dissolves surface sugar and leaves crystals behind as it evaporates. The chocolate may look old or dusty even when it is not dangerous to eat. It is a small reminder that the smooth bar is not a simple substance. It is a carefully stabilized arrangement of particles, fat, sugar, and crystals. Even the word chocolate carries a complicated history. Its precise linguistic root remains debated. It is often connected to indigenous languages of Mesoamerica, but the familiar claim that it directly derives from a single ancient word meaning bitter water is probably too neat. Like the product itself, the word changed as it moved between languages and cultures. Today, chocolate occupies several identities at once. It is a cheap snack and an expensive tasting experience. It is an agricultural commodity and a handcrafted product. It is a symbol of love sold by multinational corporations. It is a source of income for millions of people who may rarely consume the finished bars made from their harvest. It is marketed as natural even though its familiar form depends on some of the most precise food engineering in the world. And it is treated as a small indulgence, although its history touches conquest, slavery, industrialization, migration, chemistry, war, advertising, labor rights, and climate change. That does not mean every bite should become an exercise in guilt. It means ordinariness can be misleading. A chocolate bar appears simple because thousands of difficult decisions have already been made on the consumer's behalf. Someone selected the trees, someone protected them from disease, someone cut the pods, someone fermented the beans, someone judged when they were dry. Someone bought, transported, inspected, blended, roasted, ground, pressed, refined, conched, tempered, molded, wrapped, and shipped the product. The wrapper hides the chain so effectively that chocolate seems to begin at the store. It does not. It begins on the trunk of a sensitive tropical tree, inside a pod whose bitter seeds require days of microbial transformation before they even begin to resemble the flavor people desire. The future of chocolate will depend partly on whether the industry can make that chain more resilient without shifting yet another generation of costs onto farmers. Breeders and researchers are studying disease resistance, productivity, flavor, and climate tolerance. Farmers and agricultural programs are experimenting with pruning, soil management, shade systems, tree replacement, crop diversification, and better monitoring. Governments and companies are developing traceability systems intended to identify where cacao was grown and whether production is connected to deforestation. But technology alone cannot settle questions of income and power. A satellite may identify a farm. It cannot decide what the farmer should be paid. A genetic improvement may produce a stronger tree. It cannot guarantee access to schools, credit, land rights, healthcare, or reliable transportation. A label may promise ethical intentions. It cannot make a complex supply chain ethical by itself. The problem is not that nobody knows chocolate has hidden costs. Many of those costs have been documented for decades. The harder question is whether consumers, companies, governments, and markets are willing to treat farmer livelihoods and ecological stability as essential parts of chocolate rather than optional additions to it. That question returns us to the 19th century press. When manufacturers learned to squeeze cocoa butter from cacao, they gained unprecedented control over chocolate's physical form. They could take the seed apart and rebuild it. That control helped move chocolate out of royal courts and into ordinary homes. It created affordable bars, birthday cakes, holiday gifts, military rations, vending machines, school treats, and quiet moments at the end of difficult days. It gave millions of people access to a pleasure once reserved for the powerful. But the machine solved the problem inside the factory. It did not solve the conditions outside it. The tree remained tropical, the harvest remained physical, the crop remained vulnerable, and the distance between the person opening the pod and the person opening the wrapper continued to grow. Chocolate's greatest transformation was not from bitter to sweet, or from drink to bar. It was from something whose value everyone could see into something whose true cost became almost invisible. The next time a square of chocolate softens between your fingers, remember that melting is only its final transformation. Before that moment came thousands of years of human knowledge, centuries of trade, generations of labor, and a long series of attempts to make a difficult seed behave like a simple pleasure. Chocolate conquered the world by becoming ordinary. Its future may depend on our willingness to see how extraordinary it still is. If this story changed the way you see chocolate, give the video a like and subscribe. And tell us, should chocolate remain a cheap everyday treat, or should its price reflect more of its real cost?